Hello everyone and welcome to this new Bonita camp. My name is Pierre Volets. Juan Motier was actually scheduled for this session, but he was not able to join today, so I'm replacing him. But we are working together actually, and basically our job is to facilitate the adoption of the Bonita platform. So we are really active in communities and do a lot of technological intelligence. The idea being to identify and develop innovative approaches. So as an example, maybe we can highlight that we are working a lot on the cloud, adaptive case management, RPA, these kind of technologies that you might already know. On my side, before doing technical evangelism, I was working as a consultant for a few years, also for Bonitasoft. So that means that I have some experience in the Bonita project management. So that will be kind of helpful during this session, obviously, because the purpose is to introduce you with Bonita, but also the way we can create the process and then application on top of these processes. About that, Bonita, for people who don't know, it's basically a digital transformation platform. The particularity is that we are BPM based. So that means that we do use BPM as a core in order to build this, what we call the living application. We call it living because we have a highly extensible and also highly customizable platform. And this platform is actually a low code, which is slightly different than no code. Low code means that we believe that it's not possible to build application without being a little bit technical. So that's why we have this low code platform DNA. All right, so for this session, what we'll be doing is to make sure that I introduce you with all the main concepts about BPM and Bonita overall. And at the end of the session, hopefully you will have your first process and your first application up and running. To do that, obviously, we'll have to mix presentation and practical exercises. So I will be talking on my side a little bit, and then we'll switch between a few exercises when we need it. All right, what else I should say? This Bonita Camp is part of community, so this is all the resources that I will be presenting right now are accessible online. You have the link here. We have a GitHub repository. So you see that if I click on the link, it redirects me to this. This is the last release of this content that I'm presenting right now. Bonita Camp, again, is really to make sure that it introduces you to BPMN and so on, the core concepts. We will be using the 7.7 version of Bonita, which is the latest one, but we will not be discussing specific features of the 7.7 version. Before anything, as I told you, we'll be doing some exercises. So that's really important that you check that everything is good on your side in terms of resources. Everything, again, can be downloaded directly from the link. You have the corrections of the exercises that could be helpful in case you miss something. You also need to make sure that you have the latest version of the studio. So hopefully you have it downloaded. This is something that you can do directly from the website of Bonita. So I will just show you right now. So you go to Bonitasoft, bonitasoft.com. /downloads, and you will be able to download what we call the studio. But basically, you can download directly from this link here on Windows 64-bit, so that's why I would be able to do that directly here. But if you have something like Linux or something, you will be able to do that, to customize your download and then have the right version of the installer. As soon as you have it, you can just install. This is like an Eclipse to install. And then you will see that you just need to open it. We suggest to use Chrome or Firefox because these are the best for development purpose. You can use development tools and these kind of things. You might use other browsers, but on my side at least I have a better experience with Chrome. So it's up to you guys. All right. About the agenda, I told you that I will be discussing the main concept. For this, I will obviously explain what is BPM quickly, and then we'll have an overview of what is the different Bonita components, and then we'll be building a first process. And for this, we need to define what is BPMN, what is a data, what is contract, what is form, what is page, you can use actor and connectors, and all of this will be part of a specific process that we'll be building in the exercises. And then as soon as you have this process, I also told you that the purpose of this process is to make sure you can have applications. So we'll be doing that in an exercise, is to build an application on top of this process, and then we'll be deploying everything on our local environments, and that will be running on your computer. All right, so about the BPM goals, I think it's really important to highlight what is BPM at first. So the idea is really to make sure that we can collaborate during the definition, but also the execution of what we call the business processes. So we call it business because we have process in almost any organization. And these processes can be technical, but they can also be business-oriented. So when we call it business processes, it's mainly something that is related to your business. And you will have like business analysts or this kind of profile, this kind of people that will be working on definition of these steps that have to be performed in order to orchestrate something in the right way and make it efficient. So that's what what BPM brings. It's a way to collaborate around this definition and to make sure that the execution of this is run in the right way. As soon as you have something a bit more structured like that, and again, we are talking about processes here, you will be able to make sure you can track this execution and even monitor and even optimize. So when we discuss BPM, most of the time we are thinking about process, but we are mainly thinking about iterations on this process. Because again, we want to make sure this process is the best in terms of optimization, but also we have some business that might change in the future. So we want to make sure that we can iterate on this process or processes to make sure it reflects what is the current business. If I sum up, just keep in mind that BPM, the main goal is to ensure that tasks are performed in the right order by the appropriate people and in the time that is necessary. About the Bonita components. So what we call components will be all the little piece, that the platform of Bonita will be providing in order to achieve these applications. Again, we need to define, but we also need to execute. So the definition will be done directly from the Bonita Studio. So that's the download that you're doing and installing on your computer. That will be the definition of your processes and application overall. But this application, this definition that you're doing, obviously needs to be executed. So this other component that is called Bonita Engine will help with that. The engine is basically the component that will execute all your processes the way you define them, or the applications the way you define them. And you see that we have another component that is called the portal, and the portal is kind of linked to the engine because it's basically a way to administrate what is deployed and how things are running on the engine. So the portal will be a web browser or web application that will provide by default, and this application will be really helpful to make sure that you can administrate, but also we provide a default view for default kind of user that will be able to use these applications that we are building. So the portal is you can see it as a default view, these default perspectives that Bonita provides in order to be able to interact with these processes and applications that we are building on the studio and that are run on the engine. So you see the Bonita platform is basically, what we call the platform is basically the engine and the web application that is called the portal. Have a snapshot of what is the studio. If you have it already downloaded, maybe you open it already, and then maybe you saw this specific view when you build a diagram. What we call the diagram is basically a set of processes that we can define. So when you define a diagram, most of the time you will have this white board in the center, and when you will be able to drag and drop things to make sure that you build your process on this board. And then when you select things, you will be able to access properties directly from the bottom of the screen here. And you will see that depending on what you select, you will have access to specific properties or not. So that's basically what you will be doing in the studio. This is to define processes, different applications. And as soon as you have that, you will also make sure you have your UI defined. And for this, we have a web browser-based application that is linked to the studio. You can actually open a new tab on your default browser directly from the studio, and this will open what we call the UI designer. The UI designer, from the name, it's really to make sure that you can design your UIs. What we call the UIs will be any kind of forms or pages that at some point you need to leverage in order to interact with your people, with your end user. We are talking about applications and processes, but obviously at some point you have a human doing something and interacting with the system. So for this, you need to have UIs, and most of the time, again, you will be building forms. The forms will be specific to, you want people to provide you information, so you will see that it's mainly in the process. And you have pages when most of the time it will be like some kind of dashboard that you want to build, and that will be integrated somehow in what will be your application. So the UI designer is really helpful building these two main things, but you will see also that you can define your theme and what we call the layout for the application, because sometimes you prefer the menu on the left, on the right, and you want to do fancy things. You will see that the UI designer can help you on this. All right, about the Bonita engine, as I told you, the main purpose is to execute the process that you've built. It's based on Java 8, so if you have it already installed, that's nice. If not, you will have to upgrade. We actually have a Java 8 embedded in the studio because we want to make sure we can run an engine on your local. So we have a Bonita platform embedded directly into the studio for testing purpose only. So that's what we'll be doing during the exercises. But please note that this Bonita engine or platform is something, you don't use the studio anymore when you go in production. So when you develop, you use your local, that's fine. And you have the Bonita platform embedded inside that you can leverage for your testing. But as soon as you go in production or qualification, UAT, this kind of other kind of environments, then you will need to have a full server. And this is another topic that we would not cover today. That's not the purpose. But please keep in mind that the Bonita engine is not something that is only in the studio. It's kind of not the usual way you will see the Bonita engine. All right, so this engine is depending on application server. So we are leveraging REST API calls, this kind of thing. So we need to make sure that we have an enterprise application server. So we do use today mainly Tomcat and Whitefly. Tomcat is also using a specific transaction manager to make sure we can have this enterprise level of server, and this is called Bytonix. On the other side, we have JDBC transactional database in order to make sure we have all the data on the database. We want this engine to be stateless, and it is stateless. So that means that we need the database to make sure that if there is any shutdown or whatever, then we can just start the engine up, and everything will be the same way. So that's what we have currently. All right, about the portal. Again, I told you the main idea of the portal is to administrate and to provide a default view. So we have different perspectives. You can see here you have user, but you could also switch to administrator or process manager. Depending on the access you have as a user, you will be able to access these perspectives. If you have only the user perspective, you will be able to use the application, get access to the process and forms, these kind of things. If you are an administrator, then you are administrating the application and the processes used by these applications. So you have more actions available. Let's say deploying a new artifact, new resources, these kind of things. Also set up some permissions related to the process, these kind of things. Yeah, about the forms. As I told you, the idea is at some point we need some UI to perform some actions, from the end user perspective. And we have, again, two main interactions, two main type of artifacts. The first one is the form and the second one is the pages. For the forms, that will be mainly from the processes because when you're talking about a form, this is something that is provided to the end user to make sure they give inputs to the process in order to execute. So let's say you have a process with a task, and this task is we need information from a human being. Then you will develop your form to collect this information from the end user. And then the end user will be able to submit this information from this form, and then the process will be able to get this information back from the form and then continue the execution using this new context or this new information that has been provided by the end user. And these forms, all these UIs, are hosted directly by the engine, by the Bonita portal or the platform, if you want. So this is one example of the type of form or the type of UI you might have at some point in your process. And you will see that we'll be working on this during the exercises. All right, so as soon as you have these forms, these processes, I told you that we can build applications on top of that. And applications will be leveraging mostly some pages in terms of UI. And pages is slightly different than the forms. The forms, again, I told you, it's to submit information. Pages is mostly to have some dashboards to make sure that people, you can show things to different type of people and provide actions related to this dashboard that you have. So here it's a good example of it. You have some kind of a list of things that happen, and then you can start a new request, for example. So this button will link you to a new process start. And then as soon as you have this new process start, maybe it will require some inputs in order to start. But as soon as you have that, this information will be provided and performed. So yeah, this is an application because it's more global, I would say. It's interacting with the processes, and it's kind of seamless for the end user. The end user doesn't even know there is a process behind the scene. He knows about the business process, but he doesn't know technically there is a process that is triggered at a specific time when the button is triggered. So for the end user, it's really an application. It's not a process behind the scene. All right, and that's really about the components, the main components of Bonita. What I want to say now is talk about now. It's really about BPMN, which is really important to cover. BPMN stands for Business Process Management Notation. We are currently at the version 2.0, and this is a standard notation from the consortium that is called OMG, and this is the main purpose is for process modeling. So when we talk about BPM definition, most of the time we design our processes based on this BPMN standard. And Bonita is actually doing the same. We are using this specific notation for it. So a process is represented by a pool. You have multiple elements like a start event. A process has to start, obviously, and has to end. So we have a green circle for the start event. And when you have a red circle, you will see that this is basically something that is used to end the process execution. And between them, you will see that we have some kind of sequences. that will be a mix of transitions, sorry, and what we call steps or activities, if you prefer. So we provide here two examples because this is mainly what we use in the process. We use a mix of tasks that are being human. So when I say human here, it means that a human being has to provide some or do something that cannot be automatic. And you see, automatic is actually the second type of step. We can make things automatic, and then that will be directly done executed by the engine automatically. So no one will have to do nothing in terms of a human being. So yeah, automatic task, for example, would be, hey, I want to connect to Salesforce and gather some information about a specific account. Or I want to send a Twitter, using this specific account. Or I want to send a notification by email, these kind of things. So that will be really related to automated tasks. Or you want to store some information somewhere in the database, this kind of things. Human task most of the time will be to gather information from the human being or to make sure that someone confirms that something has been done and that is out of scope or out of automatic way. So that's what you're doing most of the time. And again, all these elements are linked by transitions. You will see that we can also use gateways between these transitions. Gateways are really something that you need to make sure, sometimes it's sequential, but sometimes you need some parallel tasks to be done at the same time, or you want to make sure that only one transition is taken because you are running in a specific context. Let's say if you want to book a travel, either you book a car or you book a flight. So that's something that will be conditional, and sometimes in your process you will be able to provide this condition. So I can show you quickly on the studio. I have a studio open here. If I create a new diagram, the diagram again is just a set of processes. As I told you, by default we have a process with the minimum, so start event, a step, and you see we can drag and drop and add items like that. So we'll just add an end event. If I want to have another task, let's say I need to, so I can have this gateway here. And you see we can drag and drop and have multiple transactions or sequences, if you prefer, here. The good thing is that here I can change the type of my gateway. So here I have parallel. Parallel will mean that these two steps will, as soon as we end this step here, it will go through this gateway, and it will basically trigger the two steps automatically. And this will be run in parallel. The engine will do that, obviously, at runtime. If you change to exclusive gateway is an X, and it's basically something that you can do. You can add a condition on each transition. So here you see when I select the transition, I can say, I can add an expression to the condition. So here I will make it true. And here I will make it default flow, for example. Exclusive means that only one condition will be, only one transaction will be taken. So here it means that if it's true, then it will take this one, and the default one won't be taken because we already evaluated this one as true. So this condition will go, and the step 2 will be performed. The step 3 will be performed in case we have a false value here. Then the default transaction will be taken instead of the other one. So that's just a really basic example, and you will see that in the exercise. So I will just keep it as simple as that for now. The third type of gateway we might use is what we call the inclusive gateway. The inclusive gateway is a mix of parallel and condition. That's basically all the conditions that are true will be taken. So I show you an example with 2 steps here, but you might have 3 of them n of them. This one doesn't have any condition, but I could just let it like that. And basically the idea is to say, all right, if this one is true, it will be taken. If this one, the second one, is also true, then it will be taken. And this will be not taken because at least one of them, one order has been taken. So the default one is only selected in case there is none of them evaluated to true. So this one won't be used here because we have two of them already evaluated as true. So that's what we call the inclusive gateway. It's a mix of parallel because we can have multiple of them selected, but also conditional because we have conditions on the transition. What we, as best practice, it's really important to make sure you make them symmetric. So here, if I have this inclusive gateway and I have 3 tasks performed as an outgoing transition from this gateway, then I want this 3 task to be going through inclusive gateway and then come back to a regular process execution. Whatever you're doing or working on will be good. So here you see we have symmetry between the 2 gateways. One is what we say an outgoing gateway, and the other one is an ingoing gateway. So everything is going out of this gateway, and then you have multiple transitions, and these transitions are coming back to the same kind of gateway to make sure that it's performed well in the engine. So that's part of the best practice that you need to know. And this is something that we said here. All right, so that's a quick introduction, but it was necessary to make sure that you can go through the first exercise. I will show you where is the resource in order to follow the instructions. All right, so I will come back to my GitHub, Bonitasoft community, and there, oh, by the way, this is a repository for the community of Bonitasoft. So you can find, obviously, the Bonita camp, but you can find a lot of things, a lot of other resources that might be helpful. We, as part of the community, by the way, we also have a forum, a blog. So if you have any questions, obviously feel free to get there. If you are mostly interested in professional services or enterprise edition of the product, then you have to go to bonitasoft.com and you can request a contact, and you provide your information, and obviously people will come back to you and they will answer your questions. But for the community part of it, we have this website that is specific to the community. And you see that we have a forum, we have blog, we have contributions based on projects. So everything here, you have also videos and these kind of things that can be really helpful to get started. So yeah, I mean, if you have any questions that are not related to what we are doing today, feel free to go directly to community. Most of the time, it's provided there. You have also the documentation here, documentation website. It can be helpful in case you're looking for something. Most of the time it's covered directly in the official documentation. And for today, again, in order to follow the exercises, you need to go to this specific repository. It's called Bonita Camp. I can provide that here. But if you go to releases, and if you download the latest one, so you can download the English version, the zip, and you will see that if you get the zip, it will be coming out like that, and you have the corrections. So the corrections is basically all the exercises. We have what we call boss file in Bonita. A boss file is basically an archive of all the source, all the artifacts that you that you are developing in the studio. So from the studio, if you want to get a correction and use it, you can go to File, Import, Boss Archive. See, so Boss is a Bonita Bonitasoft archive, and then you can select the file. So here I will just show you one example. So here in my correction, I could select this one, and then it will obviously show you if there is any conflict or this kind of things. Here I already imported it, so that's why it's showing that things are in conflict. But on your side, if you want to do that, you can just override and make it run. All right. Other things, obviously you have the corrections, but the corrections of exercises. So this is a PDF of these exercises. For the setup, in case you have any issue with that, the setup of the studio, you can go through all these instructions. So that's well explained, and we are talking here about this first exercise that is called modeling a basic process. And as you can see, the goal is to make sure you have your first version of the process that we'll be using as for the application. You have really complete instructions. All the steps are quite well explained, so you can go to the step-by-step instructions in case you are not sure how to do things, and then you will have screenshots and so on of most of the time how you will be doing things. So I already shown you most of it, but so I guess you won't have so much. It won't be so much a prime for you to go through this exercise in maybe 15 minutes if you have everything downloaded and installed. I will be taking questions at the same time, and yeah, I guess I will give you like 15 minutes in order to do that. So I have a question about whether we're going to use community version or enterprise. I went fast on this, but this content is based on the community edition. Bonitasoft is the company that is the main contributor on this project, but all this platform is open source, and we have at Bonita we have what we call an enterprise edition. That is something that is coming with more features. Today we'll be using the community edition, as that everyone can have. It's open source edition, so you have everyone has access to it without any licensing issue, and it's quite enough, for the what we are doing. The enterprise edition is really when you're working on advanced or critical projects. Most of the time, you want to make sure you have some support. That's what our company is providing to customers. Mainly, we are providing support worldwide. We are also providing some professional services in case you are working in the big and critical projects. You will need some expertise sometimes, so we will be able to provide these kind of things. And we obviously make some follow-up, with the roadmap and these kind of things that we on our side are building. And this is something that you have access to with the Enterprise Edition. But for everyone to know, today we will be using the Community Edition, and this is the one that you have access directly from the website that I've shown you. It's what we call the Community Edition. I have a question about the symmetric. Symmetricity is important because in the engine, we do need this to make sure we perform in the right way. If you do use specific gateway that is not the same type, you may end up with something confusing. So that's why we are saying best practices will be to use symmetry. Let's say here you have an implicit, and here you have an exclusive. That's the perfect example of things that could go wrong. Actually, even the best will be parallel. So let's say this is not symmetric, right? You have a parallel gateway here with 3 of them, and then you have exclusive here. So these are different types of gateways. And then you may have a prime, because if you have 3 of them in parallel, this means that these 3 steps will be triggered for sure. You do not know exactly when these steps will end. So maybe this one will end before the second one, the step 2, and maybe the step 2 will end before the step 3. So when I told you that the exclusive gateway here was only about 1 transition, then it means that each time there is 1 ending, it will trigger this step 5. So if you have this step 4 finishing at time 1, then it will trigger one instance of this step 5. If after a while the step 2 finishes and then goes through this gateway is an exclusive, so it doesn't care. Each time there is one transaction coming in, then it will trigger again the step 5. So it means that you will end up with something that is not something that you were wishing, at least. And this can be really confusing at runtime, because you might have like multiple instances of this step 5 and you do not understand why. And this is why we say it's better to make it symmetric. And this is really simple example, but you could have gateways embedded into gateways, and this is making things really difficult to read. So that's why we say that we like to have things symmetric. I hope you did have time to finish the first exercise. Again, in the zip file, you have these corrections that you can import as a boss file, as I've shown you. So in case you have any issue with this first exercise, you can catch up. All right. I will switch to the next topic. Give me one sec. We'll change that. Okay. So the next topic is about data. So if you've done the first exercise, you have this beautiful process, and you have some transitions and tasks and so on. But as we were saying, at some point you need some information from the end user, or you need to perform things that are a bit dynamic. And sometimes you need also to have some context. And this means information. And this information, again, has to be stored somewhere to make sure that it persists in case, let's say, the server is shutting down, or that you need to make sure you have this data available further in the process. So you will have two types of data. The first one will be on your server side, where you need to store things and persist them. So that's what we call the BPMN. And on the other side, you have some data, some variables that will be something that will be transient, and that will be only into your page of your browser. But this will last only for the session that you have. And for each of these formats, you have different types of data that you can use. So for the BDM, we have a completely structured object, so complex objects that you can define, and you can make sure you have Java primitives, because the engine is built onto Java. So you can use whatever primitive you want, and you can also reference to other complex type that you have already provided or defined in your BDM. So this is something that we do directly from the studio, by the way. We have a feature for that. So when you build your, what we call the business data model, you can define what will be the different objects, and for each object you will be able to provide your attributes, and this attribute will have types. So you recognize maybe Java types here, like long, integer, Boolean, this kind of things. But as I was saying, you can also reference a specific attribute with the type that is specific to your BDM. So here, leave request is the type that I have already provided here. So again, from the studio, you can define your structure, data structure, using the BDM. So here, if I go here, I can reference this data as a business variable. So here I click on add, I say, all right, this is my leave request. And then you see that I can provide the type of my business object. So here I have only leave request from the definition. And I can provide the default value that will be used to initialize this data, this kind of things. But again, you will see that in the exercise. The most important thing is to know that as part of your process, you can define some data that will be your business data, and this is what we call the business variables. On the other side, when you go to your UI designer, and again you will see that in your in exercises, but if you have a form, let's say this one, you will see that we have also specific types, and this is coming from the variables specific to the definition of your form or your page. So here, when you define your UI, you can say, hey, I have this kind of variable with this kind of data, this kind of value inside. But again, it's browser based, so it means that it will only this value will only be will never be persisted, will never be stored, and as soon as you close your tab or your browser, this will disappear. It won't be stored. Okay, and this is what we call the form data. So because we are building things on top of AngularJS, it's based on JavaScript, so you will have access to any kind of type that is specific to JavaScript on your form data. And there is another type that is called the documents. The documents is basically some files that you sometimes want to associate to a process. So for here, what you do is go to data, and if you select your process, you will see that you have access to this tab that is called documents. And you see that you can add a document directly into this. So let's say doc1, that's the name of it, of this variable, and I can provide that from a local file, so I will be able to browse my file and make it as a default value, this kind of things. But you can see also that we have an external system, so we can have what we call a JED or a CMS to make sure that we get this file from an external system that is a content management system. Usually documents are used only if the documents are really, you don't have a big list of it, and obviously Bonita is not a CMS, so it's not as performant as using a CMS would be. In case you want to have something performant, you need to use your CMS that will store all the documents with the permissions and so on. And as part of the process, you will see that we can use connectors that will actually make sure you can get the information or store these documents using the CMS system. So here, if I quickly show you, you can have connectors. If you add a connector, you will have different types of connectors, and you will see that some of them will be specific to CMS. All right, so you can see here I was saying that we have CMS, so the connector, you could get this file from Alfresco or store it from Alfresco, and then you have a specific connector to create a folder or get a specific item from Alfresco, this kind of things. And this will be done directly from a connector instead of the document the document feature that is coming with Bonita. Again, it's not a matter. It's a matter of performance. It's better to use a CMS, a system that is built for that. But you can use obviously the documents in Bonita if you need it and if it makes sense. If you don't have too many of them and if the documents are not too big, the reason is that all these documents, these binaries, will be stored into the engine database. And as I told you, the engine database is used to make sure that the engine, will run. So if you, make the database super full of documents, obviously things are going to be a bit more slowly on the engine side. All right, so that was for the document part. You have all this data now that is specific to your process, and this process is leveraging this data as a context to make sure that it performs well and as expected. But sometimes you need this information from the outside. Let's say the process at a specific human task, it's requesting some input from the end user. Or when you start a new case, the case it will be a process instance. When you start a new case, you will need more information to make sure that when you trigger this new case, it will be done in the specific way. So all of this means that you need some kind of interface to make sure that you can validate that the information that is provided to you as a process then is usable and is enough in order to perform what has to be performed. So we have two main locations where this kind of contract will be helpful. That will be the starter process, so when you start a process again, or when you want to execute a human task. So the idea is really to make sure you decouple the process logic and the user interface. But you know what? A process could be also calling a sub-process. So sometimes when you call a sub-process and this sub-process has to start a new case, this sub-process will require that you provide the contract information as expected. So it's not even user interface. It's also even technically. you want to make sure that this process has the right information at the right time, whether it is coming from an end user or for from a technical request. So that's a really basic use case. It all starts with the browser. You are on your browser, you have this form as a tab, and you submit the information as you provide the fields, and then at some point you submit the information directly from this form. This information will go through a JSON format and then will be provided to the engine using an API, a REST API, and this REST API will leverage Java at some point, and the engine will check either it is used as a process contract, and then this will be something really helpful for the default value of some business variable. If it's part of a task contract and that is something that is specific to the human task, then this information, this contract information that you provide will be leverageable directly from what we call operations, connectors, and scripts. So everything that you can get from the contract will be leveraged into the process in multiple ways. And we have actually an exercise on this. It's the exercise number 2. So I will let you work on this. It should take about maybe 15 minutes. All right, so I got a question. So I can show you quickly. That's actually something that often happens. So if I try to do exactly the same thing as what you have, is you should have this gateway here that is exclusive. If you have an exclusive gateway, what you need is to make sure that either you have these transitions defaults. So that's what I have on this one, for example. I just pick default flow here, and you can spot actually that it is a default directly from this little sign. If you do not have, you can have only one default. So here we have 3 transitions. We have an exclusive, so it means that each of them should be default or has a condition. So here I don't have a condition, for example, so I have this error that says that I should have something here. This one is also no conditional. So both of them are wrong here, so we'll just make sure that I add some condition on both of them. Could be anything. I'm just providing default information. What you can see is that it didn't change the error here, and this is because it's not because you change something that on the fly the status will change. What you need to do is to save and to make sure that on this tab, validation status here, and you can find your error. You can refresh directly here. And if everything is fine, then the validation will perform and you should not see this error anymore. That is true for everything that is in error. If you have an error, whatever error you have or warnings, you need to perform the change and then come back to this validation status tab and refresh. That will perform the validation again and make sure that you have an updated list of warnings and errors in case you have any of them. You can also use this file validate. That is an optional way to do that. In case you don't like the tab, you can just click on this validate, and that will perform the same thing. Didn't really show how you can create a contract. I explained what it is, but I didn't really show how to add a contract. And this is part of this diagram here. If I open this execution type. So again, a contract can be on the human task or on the process itself when you start the process. So you have this tab contract when you select the pool or the process, or if you select a human task. You see, if I select an automatic task, there is no contract tab here. So if I click on the human task, for example, you remember that on this process I added a leave request information as a variable. This business information sometimes is coming from the end user. Let's say that this leave request has to be coming from a form. So will be creating a contract on this human task. So here, if I go to execution and contract, you can add from data. And this will be super helpful in order to make sure that you can generate the contract input that will be leveraged in order to edit the information on your business variable. So obviously this will be just a specific name, a tree with names, depending on the type of object you provide. So here it's quite a simple one. It's just a list of a few attributes. So if I click on next, you can see that I can select the attributes. But if you have multiple of them, you will see that you will have a full arborescence. Let's say in the leave request, you have an address, and then this address has a street, a zip code, and so on. So then you will have a full arborescence, and you will be able to select all of this like that, or unselect. You see here we have two options. Either you don't want to use that as this information in order to change or to process this information that is coming from the contract into the business variable that we are using here, or you want to do that. So we provide an auto-generate storage operations in order to make sure that you don't have to do that manually. This is something that is maybe not that useful when you have a few attributes, but when you have 10 attributes, it's really interesting to have everything in line, especially with the input type and so on. It makes things much easier. So here, if I click on finish, you will see that it will generate my operations. So operation is slightly different than the connector. Connector is to connect to the external systems, as I quite explained you right now already. But the operations is something that helps you to perform something or persist something in your data, depending on the situation. So here at this specific step, when the form has been submitted, then I want to make sure that everything that has been provided from the form and that has been provided as a contract input, then this is used and this will be stored inside the business variable reference that I have as part of my process. So that's what we are doing here. These operations are basically setting the information. So you have one operation per attribute, and you see that we use specific information coming from the contract that we just created in order to set this new value. So here you see leave request input is something that's coming from contract input. And if I click here on my expression editor, we have multiple type of values. So here I was on the script, which is a Groovy script. But you can see that we have multiple of them, and one of them will be the contract input. So you can also select a specific input in case you want. Here we have an attribute of this complex information, so we use the script to do that. So someone is saying that it's not possible to see the data tab. It might be a problem with your perspective. Maybe you clicked like that. It's possible, it happens. In case you want to reset the view, you can go to View, Reset View here. So this is supposed to bring back the exact same view as the default one, so it's coming back with the data here. Hopefully you have access to it when you do that. All right, so let's move forward. And the next topic is the UI part. We discussed a little bit, we discussed the way to have your process. We discussed also the way to make sure you have data associated to this process and contract on top of it to make sure that you have an interface between mostly the UI or some external requests to execute a task or to create a new process, a new case of a process. So we've been doing that, but the main point of this contract is often to make sure that you have an UI associated to it. And when we talk about UI, we are talking about forms and pages. So I already discussed that a little bit, but you remember this UI designer. This is where you will be able to build these forms and page. what you need to know about it is that everything is responsive, and mainly because it's using Bootstrap. So you can use some Bootstrap specific theme on your portal and on your application. And AngularJS for the execution part is the framework that we use in order to make sure that you can extend everything that you need to extend and also define your form or page in a really smart way. So there are, again, two types of form, what we call the editable form and the overview form. Actually, I would even call it a page for the overview because, again, the main purpose of a form is to return information. The overview page is something that we have on the process in order to provide information about a specific process instance that is running. So it's mostly the context of the process that you can associate. So here, if I go to my process, for example, you will see that if I go to execution, I have the instantiation form, which is a form because you will see that from the UI designer, you will be able to define the form in order to provide information that is, your contract most of the time. And you have also the overview page. And the overview page, you can see that it's the same. In the same way, you can use the UI designer in order to provide context about the specific process instance that will be running. So let's say you're working on the leave request. This leave request, maybe you want to show it because it's a business variable, then you can show it on your form, on your overview page, and then that will be really helpful. This overview page, all this thing are hosted by Bonita, but can be also embedded into iframe or these kind of things. As I told you, you can design directly from the UI designer, but the reality is that it's not the only option. You can even have your own custom web application that is doing whatever. You can use Liferay, you can use whatever. At the end of the day, as soon as you have contract information, you will be able to make a REST API call, and this is actually what a regular UI designer form is doing. At the end of the day, what it is doing is to make a REST API call with some JSON that is in the right format to make sure that it fulfills the contract information. And as soon as you have that, it's pretty flexible. You can use the UI designer to design that. If you don't like it, or if you want to do something more specific to your company, then you can use a specific web application that will be doing that. You can also state that there is no form, and you can use 6.x. I strongly advise you to not use 6.x. This is a really different way to make forms, and this is something that is deprecated for a while, and that will be removed pretty soon. All right, by default, it's good to know that we have also automatically generated forms. As soon as you have a contract, we know what kind of information is necessary in order to perform a task or to trigger a process. So the idea is that we provide a default page or default form that will automatically generate something in order to provide this contract information. So this form will be obviously basic and pretty generic, but that's the idea. If you want to test something quickly, then you use this automatically generated form. And if you want to have something a bit more, fancy, beautiful, then at this time you will be defining your own form specific for this specific task, for example. All right, so that's what I wanted to show about the forms. These forms obviously will be created with widgets, and I think the best for me right now is to show you the UI designer. That's where you will be designing your forms most of the time. I will open one of them, just, this is part of the exercises, just to show you information here. So the idea is, well, we have a form here, and when it's completely done, what you have, it's this kind of things. You have in the same way you're defining your processes. You have a whiteboard here for each type of artifact you're building. You can select different items here, so you can drag and drop from the palette that is on the left. So you can see that we provide a lot of default widgets by default. And this is coming out of the box. You don't have nothing to do. What we can do is to build our own custom widgets if we want. So as I told you, you have default widget, but if you want something really specific to your organization, then you will be able to define your own custom widget. So for that, you create something, and you will create the custom widget with a specific name, say name1, and then you will see that this name1 custom widget is coming. So this is AngularJS specific, but basically you provide a description, some assets, so that could be some JavaScript module or whatever, some CSS if you want some rendering, and image. This could be also local or external resource. So external means that you have a URL to get that, so usually Google APIs or this kind of things, or local if you want to make sure that it's embedded inside the custom widget and there is no confusion or no dependency. All right, so as it's AngularJS, we can provide the modules, Angular modules that we want to use here, and you will see that we can customize the templates. Here it's a default one, but you can use your template, and you can also provide the controller of this specific custom widget. And this controller obviously needs some inputs in order to do things depending on the inputs or the context, and this context is coming from the properties. And if I come back to my form, you will see that the properties is something. If I click on one of them, on one widget here, for example, you have these properties on the right, and you can see that these properties most of the time are linked to what we call the variables. So the variables, as I told you, is something that is specific to your page, and that will be specific. That will be specifically generated at runtime. But these variables, you have a list here, could be leveraged inside the properties of your widgets. So that's something that makes it really flexible, and also that makes it really responsive, because if the value change, then it will be reflected and rendered directly using the widget. Or if the widget, for example, you have someone providing the information as a field, then this information can be also bound directly to the variable, and this variable information value will be updated. And this variable can be used for something else. You can have a condition on it. You can, so all your form can be really responsive and flexible based on all of this. Let me show. Let me come back to the. To the widgets here. So yeah, as I told you, we have a specific set of widgets that is coming by default. We can customize our own widgets, and the idea of this forms is to to make sure that we can also show information at some point. If you want to display a process variable, then you have to go on the other side, and for this, the browser will also make a REST API call. But this REST API call will be to get access to a variable, a business variable that you have in your process, for example, that will be the context of your process. And this context is stored in the business data, which is basically some database that Bonita administrates for you based on the structure of your BDM. So when a browser page or form wants to show something that is specific to a process, then it has to request from the engine the information, and this information will come from the business variable that is referenced in the process, and then it will be stored from the database. So this database will be requested, and then the information will be provided. So here I have this human task here, and I have a form associated to it. So if I click on edit here, it will redirect me to the UI designer. And on this form, I will be able to see, to provide information. So for example, here I want to provide information about the requester. So this is coming from my process. If I go here and show data, I have a request here, and this is the leave request. So I want to show information about this context of the process in the form, because I want to validate the request. So to validate the request, the end user will need to see the information on the form. So for this, what I will be doing is to use the requester variable here, so you can see that, or the request. So the leave start date, for example, is the request variable. This request variable is here, and you can see that we are using a REST API. So what we call an external API here is a REST API call. And this REST API call is using a link. This link is basically a URL. And this URL is coming from the request underscore ref. So maybe you recognize the request variable name that we have here on the business variable reference. So this is the request name. So we are using this because this is part of the context that is provided to the task. And this context is something that is accessible by any form. As soon as you are linked to a specific process, then you will be able to request the context of this process. So here, you see I have another variable that is called context, and it's gathering the information from the task ID. So the task ID is basically used to gather the context, and because the task is associated to a specific process instance, then I will have a specific context associated to it, and this variable will contain it. Because it's a REST API code, it will be done as soon as the form shows up. And then this context, I can request the information about the request, and this will provide me the link in order to request this information from a REST API call. So that's why we have this context information coming from a REST API call. From this context, because on my process I have a request variable, a business variable, I can get this link that is provided to me as a context, and then make the call as a second REST API call to make sure that I have the request information as a business variable in my form. As soon as I have it in my form, I can leverage this information to show it up directly in my widget. So that's why I use this, for example, as information in the leave start date. Again, you will be doing that in the example, so the exercise, so I will let you work on this, but that's the most important thing to know. So I will let you work on this. Hopefully, you won't have any problem with this one. That should be about, maybe 15 minutes. All right. So next topic, as I was saying, is about actors. So actors is because we have been building a process with some human interaction, and for that we did some UI. We actually drafted a specific process. From this, we added the data, and then we added the contract to make sure we have an interface and we can decouple the business logic to the and the UI, and we actually added the UI on top of this. But this UI has to be accessed by the end user, and we want to make sure that it's the right people doing the right thing. So for this, we need to make sure we have actors, and this is something that we'll be using in the process. We'll define the actors in the process, and you will see that we have to configure these actors to be mapped to the specific organization of the company or the organization you have. So again, an actor is basically a label that we declare at what we call the pool level. So it's the scope of the pool, and we can associate them to what we call the lanes. I didn't show that yet, but I will show it right away, and human tasks directly. There are two main options when we deal with actors, or when we deal with associating people to a specific execution of a process. They are what we call the actors, or the actor mapping, and the actor filters. So they are. It's not perfect. There is no perfect solution here. It's a kind of a trade-off. So that's why we have two main options. The first one is the actors. So the main benefit of an actor is that it's always up to date with the organization. What we call the organization is basically the list of the users you may have, a list of groups and associated to the users. So when you I can show you that quickly. When you have on your studio, you can build an organization. You can define it directly here. By default, it comes with the ACME organization. So if I click on next here, you will see that We have a list of an arborescence of groups. So here it's just an example, but you could have something much more complex than that. You have also roles. So here the only role we have is member, because someone can be a member of a group. That's the only thing we have by default. But you could also have a manager, for example, of a specific group. So or department. So this is what it is for. I mean, you can have multiple roles. You can have director, you can have president, whatever name you like that makes sense in your organization, and that usually it's usually a complementary with the group, and this is what we call the membership. And this is the list of the users that will be part of our organization. All of this is manual. This is because we are in the studio, and the studio again is mainly for test. But obviously, as soon as you come to production servers and these kind of things, all of this will come with LDAP or Active Directory. So if you have that in your most of the organizations will have that. And the idea is to synchronize the LDAP information and the Bonita information. So that's why you have list of users here that we entered by default. But again, this can be automatically synchronized with the LDAP, as that you don't have to enter manually if you have thousands of users or even millions. That might happen with some applications. So yeah, just for the example, we have 24 of them here. For each of them, obviously, you have some information like the username and password. By default, the password is BPM, lowercase. So each of the person will have this password, and will have the membership. So here, for example, you can see that this Anthony is a member of the North America sales team. And this guy has a specific information, actually not that much here, but has some professional contact information. So you have the email, phone number, this kind of thing. So all of this is defined in the organization, and you can do it directly from the portal to make sure that you have some information for the test. Again, and this is something that you can publish on the embedded platform. So here, when I could have multiple organizations, and depending on what I'm developing, I would like to try with this one or this one. And then you can publish this information. So if I go to next, you can provide obviously all the information that is necessary. And if you go to organization, you can deploy one of them. So here these are useless, but this one could be published again, deployed again in case you have done some modification. So this deploy means that it will make sure that the current organization that is on the studio, that is in the Bonita engine, Bonita platform of the studio, then will reflect this organization. But here is not really the point. It was just to show you that we have this organization that is necessary and that Bonita is handling directly as part of the engine database. And this organization, you have to map with the process that you're building, and there are a few ways to do that. So if I come back to the presentation, I was saying that basically the main benefit of the actor is to always have this link with the organization up to date. So if you change information in the users or in the groups, maybe a user is not a member of a specific group anymore, then you will see that when we use actor, it will be reflected directly up to date. The limitation is that obviously it cannot rely on too much dynamic data. So we cannot rely on the context of the process itself. If you have some variables, for example, we cannot make a specific rule that will be based on the context that is really specific to this process instance. Let's say, what is the value of this specific variable that is part of my process? And then I will give the access to this person or this person in my organization. This is not something you will be able to do with the actor. And you will see that the rules that we define are called actor mapping, and this mapping is done with a specific format, and this is why we can make sure that it's always up to date. On the other hand, when you want to make sure that you overcome this limitation that we have on the actors and make sure that you have a specific list of people that will access or be able to execute this specific task or start a new process depending on the context. Then you will be using actor filters. These actor filters will obviously make sure that you can use these variables, as I was saying, so mostly in human task. That will be helpful. And the limitation here, though, is that because we are leveraging context, we do not reevaluate it all the time. So we can use some context, but we only execute or evaluate this once at the task creation. So when the human task is created and this task has an actor filter, this actor filter will be evaluated once, and then the information, the output will be a list of candidates, and this list of candidates will be persisted and then will be used for the task. So if something changed in the business data, or if maybe some user is not part of another group or whatever, something like that, the organization change, then it will not be reflected because it has to be reevaluated, and it's not done by default. It is possible to do it, to request an evaluation, an update of the evaluation using APIs of Bonita, but it's not done automatically. So it's what we call the limitation here. Maybe I can show you quickly on the studio how it looks like. So I've shown you the organization part. Here I have a process. So we'll show you that we have actors defined on this process. So you see on the tab actors, I have only one actor here, but I could have another one. You see that there is this little icon here. This is what we call the initiator of the process. Only one actor can be the initiator of the process, and initiator means that only this kind of people, this actor will be able to create a new case, a new process instance of this specific definition. So here it's currently it's the employee actor, but it could be the actor one, and for that I can set it to this way. I can also unset the initiator and change basically here. All right, that is just an example, but basically the idea is we have only one actor that can be initiator of a process, and for that you need to use this. As soon as you have multiple actors, so here let's say we have two of them, we can use, I told you we can use associate these actors to lane. And you see, by the way, actors is only label and description. But this label, you can assign them somehow, associate them to lanes. So these lanes are on the process here. And if you want another one, you just click here on the left and add here. So you see that when I click, I have another lane that will be provided. And this is what we call a pool and lanes because it looks like a swimming pool. So you have a process here, and this process has lanes. These lanes will be associated to a specific actors, and whatever is in this lane will be specific to this actor. So here for human automatic tasks, it doesn't really matter because there is no actor actually doing nothing about it. But when you are dealing with human task, if this task is in this lane like validator, it means, or at least the business will understand that this task has to be performed by the validator type of people. So here I will just delete this one because it's not really necessary. And what I will show you is that on this lane, this lane is associated to the employee actor. And this one is also employee actor. So it doesn't really make any sense because most of the time you will have another actor. So here, if I come back to my pool, I have actor one. Maybe validator is actor one. So you see, you can change that directly here. So you can associate a lane to this. And here, the particularity is that we even associated an actor filter to this lane. So you can see here that this is not empty. This one is empty, right? So it means that it will be using the actor. But this one is, the actor filter is set. So when the actor filter is set, it means that it will override the behavior of the actor alone. So that means that this initiator manager actor filter is used. And if I edit here, I can show you that what has been done. So basically, we'll use the manager of the initiator. So the initiator, as I told you, is the person that who created the case, and I want the manager of this person to be the candidate for this task. So I use this specific actor filter because I need some context information based on the execution of this case to make sure that I have the right candidate for this task. Or task. If I have multiple of them in the lane, then this task will be using this lane configuration. So here, you see on the human task, I told you that you can use the lane, but you can also specify your own stuff. So here on this human task, I'm using the actor defined in lane. So basically employee actor with the actor filter, by the way. So the actor filter will be evaluated, the one that is defined here, will be evaluated at the creation of this task. Not before, but at the creation of the task. When the flow is accessing this task, then this task will be created, and the actor will be evaluated for this specific task. I could also have my own actor and then do not even use the lane one. So here I could say actor one, and if I really want to have an actor filter, I could also set my own actor filter. So the actor filter again is something that it's like a connector. So you can select the type, and you can have your own type. By the way, it's if you want to customize that, you can do that. By default, we provide a set of it, like the initiator manager that we used in the lane. So you could do that also from there. The only thing that you need from here is absolutely no information, because you know who started, and you know what is the manager, who is the manager of this person. So everything is quite automatic here, but it could request more information about the context in order to evaluate who will be able to access that. Let's say we are working on the leave request, then maybe you need to make sure to know how many days this leave request is based on. And for that, you will have like some people that will evaluate, that will validate the request. Whether it is a long time or not, maybe that won't be exactly the same people. And for this, you need the information about the context of this request. And this request context is in the data of the process in the request information here. So this request information has to be used, and for that, we'll need to use our custom actor filter in order to leverage this information. So all of this is doable on your own. You can define your own custom actor filter and leverage the information directly from there. And again, it will be evaluated at runtime. If you do want to use only the actor, and it's a good review, so here if I come back to it and I do not set nothing, and that means that I will use the actor one here. If I save that, you can go to configuration, configure. So if I click on configure, you will see that I have this actor here. So I have multiple things that I can configure in the process, but one of them is the actor mapping. So this is not working for the actor filter because the actor filter will be evaluated at runtime, but the actor mapping is basically the set of rules that will be specific to the actors that you specified for this process. So here we have the employee actor, and by default we link it to the whole company. So that's why we have a group ACME. All the people that are part of this ACME group will be part of this employee actor. So if someone is not part of this group anymore, then it will be up to date. The process will not provide this to the end user because this user is not part of the group anymore. So that's what we call to be up to date with the information. And here the actor one is not mapped because I just created it, but I can go to groups, for example, and say that this is only the people from the finance department that will be able to be associated to this actor. And you see that now it's associated to it, and that's because this task is associated to actor one, only people from the finance department will be able to perform this task. And we have an exercise on this. All right, so at the same time people are working on the exercise, I have a few questions. So all this configuration about the actor is really interesting, and it helps you to define what we call the candidates for this execution. But we also have, for one element, one task, for example, we need to make sure that there is only one person able to submit the information at the time. So for this, we use the feature, the assignee feature. So if you are a candidate of a task, you can take the task and then be an assignee of this task. And if it's just to make sure that you take the task and no one else is working on this at the same time, because that could happen. If you have a list of tasks that are accessible to you, and many people in your team can see this task because they are candidates. If they all work on this and then you submit, it could be a waste of time, or at least it's not optimized. So what we do is to make sure that if you have a list of users that will be the candidates of this task, if someone wants to submit the information in the form and even access the form, this person need to make sure they are assignee of this task that is associated to the form. And for this, the person will take the task and then submit the information. And this makes sure as soon as someone is assignee of the task, no other candidate of this task will be able to access it anymore. So it's like to take the task, and if you at some point need to work on something else and want to release the task, you can also release the task as that you are not the assignee of this task anymore. And then other candidates can see the task and take it if it makes sense for them. All right, so I have a question. The question is, we don't have a human being triggering the execution, but more a system. So if you have a system that needs to, execute a task or start a new process, then that means that this system will have to use API to do the job. So we have two different APIs. What we call the Java API, because our engine is based on Java, we can access it directly from Java. So we have a specific dependency that we can use, that is the client dependency. If you have Maven and if you're working on Java, you will be able to add this dependency in your project and then use Bonita specific classes in order to make sure that you access the APIs and perform the task that you need. One of these tasks could be to trigger a new process, and this will be using the contract information that you need to provide in case the process is based on the contract. If you want to execute a task, that's quite the same thing. You will have to provide the contract information if there is any contract that is needed, that is defined for this task, and then you will have to make the call with the API and the information on it. Again, we have two things. We have the Java API and the REST API. So the Java API, it will be a Java hash map or whatever JSON you like if you are on the REST API side. So if your web application is PHP, I guess you will have to leverage a REST API call. And for this, again, that's just a matter of making the right call with the right payload that will be the contract information. And obviously, you cannot start, this system has to be a user. So it will be obviously a specific user in your organization. But you cannot start a task without being authenticated. So anything, the first thing that you do with the APIs on Bonita is to log in. Either you are using the Java API or the REST API, you need to be authenticated. And for this, you need to log in. On the Bonitasoft, on the Java side, it's just a method that you call. You have a logging API, and actually I can show you something about it in the documentation. First project. So there is a nice example somewhere on the documentation about this.
if I find create your first project. So this page is really interesting to explain you how the clients will work when you use Java API. So you see you have Maven dependencies. So you can you have one Bonita client dependency that you need to use, and this will be helpful in your project to make sure you can connect to as a user of the organization. So again, if you are a system, your username could be Salesforce, or could be application number 1, something like that. It doesn't really has to be a real user, a human being. But you need that to make sure that you have the right access. So you can log in. As soon as you log in, you have a session, and this session is associated to obviously to the user that has logged in. And as you have it, you can use this session to access the different methods that are part of the APIs. So if you want to get information, if you want to execute a task, or if you want to create a new, start a new process, that's this example here, we'll be using the process API to do so. And one of the methods of this API is start process, for example. So this is specific to Java API. For the REST API, again, I suggest that you go to REST API, and you will see that you still need to be authenticated. And for this, the same way, you will need a session. And to get the session, so there is a specific, chapter about that here, authenticate to Bonita. So to do this, you will use the logging service, and you will use the post because you are creating a new session. And you will provide, obviously, your username password. So as a system, you will have a specific user associated to it. And then this will make sure that you have the right cookie, that is returned. So you will have this token that is generated for security purpose, and you will also have the session that will be part of it. So the server knows who you are and that you are authenticated. And based on this session, obviously, it will you will have access to things or not, depending on who you are and what kind of access you have. The next topic is called connectors. So it's really interesting to learn about that. Now you have your process with APIs, with UIs, sorry, with data. We have people associated to the different things that has to be done by human or by system automatically with an external system. But at some point, we want to make sure that the process is doing things automatically, and this will be mainly done by using connectors. When I say automatically, this could be basically to store some data or these kind of things that are really specific to Bonita, so that's totally fine. But sometimes it's something that is completely not related to Bonita and that is not hosted by Bonita. So that's what we call the external systems. The external systems will be something that Bonita doesn't own, but need to perform, to execute the process. In Bonita, we provide a specific set of connectors by default. I already shown you that for the CMS, but we have also the email, the SAP. We have like a large amount of default connectors that you can use directly from your process. But this, in the same way you can customize your actor filters, you will also be able to customize your connectors in case you need something really specific. This might be specific because of the version you're using of an external system. Maybe that we don't cover that with the default ones, but also because sometimes you're using some internal or house-built system that Bonita cannot really know about. And at this stage, most of the time you will need to develop your own custom connector, and that will be done directly from the studio. All right, so about connectors, the idea is to make sure we can interact with the external system, and this can be, these custom connectors, if you need to define them, that can be directly done from the studio but also any kind of Java IDE. Again, a connector will be something that will be run on the engine, so that's why we are using Java. So if you need to have a custom connector, you will have to be using Java, right? And that's why we are talking about Java IDEs here. Something that might be really interesting is to check if you're looking for something, there is a big chance that someone else, got the problem or needed that before you. So what I suggest at this time is to check the community projects or contributions. Most of them will be extension points, and as part of these extension points, we have the connector. Connector is really one of the core extension points that that makes Bonita flexible. And many people are working on different extensions and different connectors. So most of the community members will be sharing what they're building in case it makes sense to share. And this is accessible directly from the community website. So I can show you that quickly if you want. So if you go to community bonitasoft.com, you have the contribute here, and you have projects. So contribution is usually a project on our website, and you can search for something that has been done before. So let's say I actually worked on the REST API extension back in days, so maybe it's over there. All right, so you see you have people working on different things, and so this is usually things that will be coming as an artifact that you can import directly in the studio. So here, if you're working on the custom connector, you can create a new definition, a new implementation that can be linked to the definition. You can test your connector directly from the studio when you develop it, and you can export or import. So you will be able to import a connector that has been done and as a contribution. So that's definitely something you can do, or you can import the connector that you have built directly from any kind of Java IDE, maybe outside of the studio. So I think that's about the connectors. I already shown you how it works on the process side, so I won't come back to it. And actually, you will be doing that in an exercise, so it's not really useful for me to do it twice. I'll let you work on this. Something that people might be interested in is when you do custom connectors, we are developing Java, and that means that sometimes we need dependencies like jar files. Maybe I can show you quickly when you do a custom connector. So when you create a new definition, you will see that you can also provide dependencies. So this is really important because this is jar file basically that you will be able to provide. So this jar file, I wanted to make sure you understand that when you have dependencies like that, Bonita is making sure that these dependencies are used in priority at execution time, at runtime. But if you're using something that Bonita already has as a dependency, I just want to make sure that you understand that it's also possible to use or to leverage dependencies that are part of Bonita dependencies by default. I do not suggest to do that. I don't think it's the best practice because in case, obviously Bonita can change the version of the dependencies that are being used in the engine. So if your connector is really focused on this specific version and then there is an issue or regression or whatever with the new version, then maybe there will be a conflict. So that's the best is really to make sure that when you develop your custom connector, making sure you have all the dependencies provided into your custom connector as part of the definition or as part of the implementation. And maybe something that's, these dependencies could be used in the inputs. I think it's important to show that when you have an input, so here it's the example of the email, so I will just take that as an example again. And this is the exercise again, so I guess you will have the same at the end. But you see that we have inputs here. Inputs is basically, it's like a function, right? You need some parameters or some inputs in order to or some context to make sure you can run something about it. When you connect to a database, for example, most of the time you will need a specific host name or specific database name, and then you will need the SQL, the script of it. So just for you to understand that this input will come from there, you will be able to leverage what we call the expression editor. So as I'd already shown you, you have multiple different type of expression that you can use. Depending on the situation where you are in the process, you will have access to things or not. Like, for example, here we don't have access to the contract information. But you can make it Java, or you can, so you have access to the business variable. You can also use parameters, which are really important from my point of view for connectors. And I will explain you that right after. For the script, this is basically the Groovy script, so we already discussed that. But if you have a host, maybe you want to have something dynamic and a variable. For the parameter, it's really important to see that for process, you can have in the data, you can have parameters. So if I select my process, I can go to parameters and I can add a parameter on it. So let's say here you're working on the email. You want to have a parameter for the IP or the host name, because let's say the host name, let's say you notify by email a lot of different times in the process. You don't want to edit that or to have a new version of the process. You want to use parameters. And for this, you need to define your parameters. So it will be, let's say, email host name. So that will be a text. And then this host name, this parameter can be configured directly on the process side. So in the same way I have the actor mapping, I can also have a parameter, and then I can have a specific value for the specific configuration. So let's say that will be, something like that. Have absolutely no idea what will be our host name here, but just some IP address. And then this can be used directly from your connectors as that you decouple it. You don't have something hard-coded in the inputs. Here we have it, localhost. We don't want this, right? We want to make sure that we can use something more flexible. So we'll be using the parameter. And then this is a reference to the configuration of your process. Okay, so when you're on the process, and here we are on the administrator perspective. So this is something that you can administrate directly from the portal. When you have a process, you can change the actor mapping. So here you remember maybe this employee actor. By default, I had that in the configuration, so that's why it's showing up. But I could have something else. I could change it on the fly. So that's why we call it live. So here I could say Anthony is part of this actor. What I could do also is to change the parameters. Here I do not have any parameter on this process, but basically you will have the list of parameters, and you will be able to change the value. In the exact same way I did here when I changed the actor mapping here and the parameters, you can do that live when the process is deployed. So let's say you have your email connector that is linked to a specific server, email server, and this process will run with a hard-coded value as it's done right now, as it was done, sorry. Then if your email server has a different host name, then you have an issue because it's hard-coded, and you need to build a new version of the process and to find anywhere you use this specific hard-coded value, which is not good. So that's why usually we use this parameter in the connectors to make sure that we we factorize, and that we can change live this value of the parameter without having a new version of the process. Oh, I have actually a really good question from Dave. So there are a few things about business data. What we call the BDM is what we provide out of the box. So you can define your structure, you can structure your data directly here. But now you are playing around with the connectors. You maybe understand that you can also play around with database that is an external database and that is not administrated by Bonita. So if I'm here and I want to collect some data from the outside, and this outside is an external system, which is a database. This database contains some business data, and I want to play around with that. And you see that as part of the connector, I have a database here, database type of connector. So we actually, when I said that the business data is something important, it is actually important. And at Bonitasoft, we provide a feature to handle that in an easy way. So for this training, this little camp, obviously, I cannot go through all the options, but I wanted to show you the main one, which is the BDM feature directly administrated by Bonita. But if you have an external database, you can obviously use connectors for that. And if you are using SQL Server, for example, you will be able to make a specific request, and this request will be based on SQL. So here, if I configure a specific connector, I can provide my SQL Server jar file here, for example, and then I can provide information about my server, and then I will be able to provide the SQL directly there. So this will obviously, so it could be a batch, by the way, but here I want to do select something from table, I can, and this will be generated. And then here, when this request will be executed into the database that is remote, then you will be able to extract this information from the what we call the output operation. So the output operation is the opposite of the input. Again, you need to see the connectors as a function. So the function is taking input, and depending on the the execution here will be, for example, to request the SQL. But at the end of the day, you also have an output. Sorry. So here the output will be the result set, but you could have other ones. Here, because we are in the database and we request the database, the result will be a result set type of element. And this can be used in the Groovy to filter, to do whatever, and then you can associate that to your information that is the business information on your process. So that could be business variable. I didn't show you that, but we have also the process variables. These process variables are really useful only to make sure that you have information about the flow. This is business variable. It's called a business. Process variable is just related to the process itself, and this will be stored in the engine. So for the performance, it's really not a good idea to put your business there. So process variables, again, is something that is used only for the flow. As soon as you have business data, it will be a business variable if you are using BDM. And the main point of using BDM is actually to leverage this nice integration. You don't have to go out of the studio to make sure that you have this BDM set up and integrated well in the process. If you want to have your business variable, your business data outside of this BDM feature, then you will have to use connectors, and these connectors will be helpful to synchronize the information between your process and your database. Most of the time, this information should be requested each time you need it to make sure you don't duplicate information in the process variable, for example. All right, and I was saying, this is good. We have this process, but a process alone is not that great, or at least from the default portal that we provide from Bonita. This is something that is really what we call BPM-centric application. It has like generic terminology and even specific to BPM, which is not something that people are usually, they don't know really what is a process as an end user, and they don't know what is a task, what is an assignee. So this is really specific to BPM, and by default, Bonita provides something that is BPM oriented as part of the default portal for the end user. When you want to build these processes, most of the time you want to have an application that is specific to your use case. So either you will use your completely custom web application, or you will be using and hosting this application directly from Bonita. What we do by default is to provide you with some tooling to define your UIs with the UI designer, and even to deploy an application that will be hosted directly into Bonita. So the good thing with that is that it's totally integrated. So if you have users logged in Bonita, they will be able to access or not some applications that you have deployed. We are basically building what we call the MVC pattern here. The model is developed directly from the business data, and this is something that we provide as a BDM as Bonita. Then the view would be the UIs, so the forms and the pages, and the overall application. And this is something that we can build directly from the UI designer as part of Bonita. And the third layer is what we call the controller. And the controller is basically the processes that we define to provide the business logic. So this is something that is really important to see, is that we have a complete architecture following the MVC pattern, or if you prefer to call it layers, but it's the same. We have different layers with different purpose. And all of this is decoupled and make sure that it's maintainable and that you can easily iterate. So again, you have processes, but we need applications. And applications I can show you quickly, maybe from the studio. So this is something that we can develop from the studio. So you see these application descriptors. We can basically create a new one. I think we have one from the example, from the exercise, so I will just show you. So we have this, this application has a descriptor. A descriptor is just a way to say, well, we have multiple artifacts, we have forms, we have pages, we have processes, we have scene, we have layout. All of this has to come together, and this is what this file will define. So here we have the design, but we have also the source, and this is basically on XML. So here you see that the only thing I have is the status, which is a specific artifact, and that this specific application is accessible from a specific profile. So the default profile is called user. So all of this can be deployed, and you can see directly hosted by our application. So here, when you go here, you can deploy this application, and this will deploy the application descriptor, and this will be accessible from Bonita. So if I come back to Bonita portal, I will be able to show you how it could look like. So here, let's say I'm a user, and I'm a user that is an administrator, and in this tab I have all the applications. I just deployed the leave request one. So if I go to edit here from the portal, I can also edit, but this is the same information that I have from the studio. The good thing is that this application is accessible from Bonita directly, so we have the URL here. It's a token. So if I open it, you will see that it's hosted by the application. There is a note found because my descriptor is based on the specific page that I might have not added. So I would fix that, and we will do that in the exercise, by the way. But maybe I can do that directly from the UI. So from my descriptor, I have a page that is called leave request status, so I can export. And as soon as I have it exported, that's basically what we call the artifact. And this artifact, I can add it as an administrator, I can add it as a resource on my platform. So here, if I go to download, because I just downloaded that, I can select my page, and this will be uploaded as a resource. Now this resource is accessible by the application. I need to redeploy. Give me 1 sec, I'm doing that. Up, deploy, okay. So here now, when I go to applications, I should see in the description that I have this page, and you see this page is here. So now you have what we call the living application. This living application here is based on the page that I just exported from the UI designer and that I have imported as a resource of my platform. This page is not doing nothing right now, but what is important is to see that you have a menu on the top and that you have a page based on where I click here. So I don't have a menu, but I could have. Let's say here I add a navigation on my description menu. And then I can select the page that I want to show clicking on this menu. And this one was the default one. So you see the little house here, it means the home. So if I come back to the application now, I should have a menu that is called menu. So that's why we call it living application. It's because I can change that and it's live. I mean, I'm a regular user here and I can access something that has been somehow edited on live. It's deployed, but I can change it directly there. So I can add pages, I can add navigation as you saw, and I can also change the look and feel. So here it's the default layout, but I could have something else. Or if I have a different theme, I could have a different theme. This is all part of these resources here. So if I have here, I have a Bootstrap default theme, but I could have like different other themes that will be generated from Bootstrap framework. So you could have some things on the web that make sure that you can generate this kind of theme. Then when you come back to the edition here, you will be able to select another one. And the same for the default layout. And actually, I think we can do that directly from the UI designer, from the community edition. Let me check that. You see application layout here. You can define your layout, the custom layout, directly from there. So this is the regular UI designer feature, but this time it's a layout. I mean, that's about it. I mean, the idea is really to be able to edit the navigation, the pages, the look and feel, the theme, but also the profile. So when you edit, you can see that you can provide obviously the name of the application, the token that you want to use to host this application. You can also have different versions for a single application, and you can also provide who will be able to access this kind of application. So if you select administrator, only the administrator people will be able to access this application. So you can have different perspectives depending on the kind of people you have logged in. So this page is something that we have created on the UI designer. And as I told you, a page, it's mostly a dashboard where you provide information about something. So here, this is the home page of the application. So most of the time what you will have is, well, I want to create a new request for the leave request. And this button will be basically a start process REST API call to make sure that a specific process that we have defined in the business logic, so this one, will be triggered. So there is a big link between application, the pages that are part of this application, and also the processes that are the controller of this application. So that's just an example. And here, by the way, I can maybe show you quickly how it works. So if I come back to my UI designer and I do show you this page that we are showing right now, you can see that this button that is called create a new request is something that will do a post, because we want to create a new process. So we do a post and we use a specific URL to call this post, and this is a specific REST API call from Bonita, and we provide what we call a specific form input variable, and this variable, as you can see, contains the contract information. So the same way you can use forms, and provide a submit information as a contract information to perform a human task. When you are on the page of an application, most of the time you will be also doing such things, but that won't be specific to a form. That will usually be some actions that will be other REST API calls, like creating a new process, providing information coming from there, or you will be doing something else to get information, for example. All right, so at this stage, I know that we have one exercise left. All right, so I got a question about the due date. So basically, when you are on your studio and you have a task, your human task, most of the time the automatic task will be something that should be done in seconds. Depending on how many connectors you have associated to it, that might take minutes, but not that much more than that. When you are on the human task, that could last like months. Really depends on what is done here. Maybe a task will be due, maybe a month, maybe minutes, depends on the SLA or whatever you're working on. So at this stage, when you are here, you can also specify the due date. So by default, I cannot remember what is the default due date. But for sure, what you can do is to provide the due date as an expression. So this is something, some information that is coming by default in the engine. So each human task will have access to this due date information. And this information can be evaluated at runtime, and it will be evaluated at the task creation. So here, I could have like a Groovy script to take maybe, is it a beautiful day or not? If it's a beautiful day, then it's about a 3-day SLA. If it's a bad day, then it's only 1-day SLA. And then the due date will be basically evaluated based on that. So it's completely dynamic. I have a question about using a specific connector in order to get access to business variables. So that's something that you can do from an expression, a Groovy script expression. So a connector, again, is something that is used to connect to the external systems, but that could also be something that will just run some Groovy script. In this Groovy script, the best thing you can do is to do some evaluation. So here, if I have a connector here, I want to add a connector. I have a few connectors that are quite generic. The first one would be the REST API connector, because obviously you have some REST calls, and this is something that can be done as an API call for a lot of different kind of systems. So that's usually what we use today. But you also have script connectors. And the script connector that you will be using most of the time will be the Groovy script connector. So to answer the question, if you need to do something as part of a connector, and this will be done in a Groovy script, then you can do Groovy script here, and then you can provide a name for this execution. And then in the script, the good thing is that you have provided variable. Each time you write a script, by the way, you will have that. You will have provided variables. The most important one for Bonita is the API accessor that gives you the information, a link to the API. So if you want to, get information or perform something using Java API, you will be using the API accessor that will provide you, that is basically the entry point for everything. And you can also have some contextual information. So here we are in a specific process, so we have an ID for this definition. We have information about which process instance ID we are running right now. So at runtime, you can maybe get information specific to this process instance, these kind of things. And we also have variables. So variables, you can see that we have the parameter because I created a parameter, but also the business variable directly there. So someone was asking, how can I have access to the business variable directly from a script? You can use a connector to actually run some Groovy, and it makes sense in case you're doing something with the external system most of the time. So that's one point. The good thing also is that usually you have what we call DAO. So as part of the provided variables, as soon as you have a BDM, the good thing is that we can integrate and provide DAO. And we have one, DAO, by the way, means that data access object. So it's basically some kind of accessor to make sure that you have functions specific to a specific type of object. So here, Let's say I'm working on something and I want to do something, perform something on the business variable. So on my Groovy script, I will have access to this DAO, which is specific to the type leave request. And then I have access to a bunch of methods. So most of them are coming from Groovy, but you have, for example, this one that is specific to the type, like find by day count. What you need to know is that when you define a specific type, this BDM, this DAO will be generated based on the attributes. So here I could do, for example, find information, request information about this specific leave request, find a list of them based on the day count. And I will show you why this is available. If I go to development business BDM define and I go to leave request, you can see that we have the day count here. By default, we also have few things here. We have the unique constraints. By default, we have none of them, but you could add that. So you could add your own constraints if you want, the same way you do in a regular database. You can add also indexes in case you want to make things faster. Depends on the implementation you're doing. And something that we generate by default is some queries. So depending, by default, we are providing, so this is for pagination, by the way, the find bind and the count for. The count for is used to, to make sure that you can have a pagination on your search. And the find by, so usually when you have a count for find by a requester ID, you will have also the equivalent here. And you can see that by default, we generate them depending on the attributes. That's why they are called default here. If you want to have your own query, which I suppose this is what you are trying to achieve, you can click on custom, add a new query. And then you can also, it's a JPQL query. So you can change that. You can change the attributes, the parameters of this query. In case you want only to rely on this once, you can, sorry, I will do the opposite maybe. It's easier. I will drop is approved. And then here, I don't really care about this is approved. So I will just remove this line and my query will be good. The output here can be a single in case you're doing some counts, these kind of things, or a list of these leave request objects. So here it's the case. I'm selecting that. So I do a multiple. And then I have my custom query that is accessible. What I will be doing here is to reset. As I'm done with that, what I can show you is that if I come back, oh, by the way, I was showing you directly from a connector, but you can also do that directly from an expression, whatever expression you like, as soon as it's a Groovy script expression. So let's say here I'm in my request and I have a default value here. I have a Groovy script here, and you can see that I still have a DAO here. I'm not in a connector, but I'm in the default value of this business variable. Maybe you want to find a specific element that already exists by default. So maybe you will find by day count using the DAO. But maybe you want to use my query, my new query one, and then you will be able to get multiple of them using some information. And you can see that we have the start index and the max results. For this kind of pagination stuff again. And at the end of the day, what we'll be doing is to have a list of elements that will be leave request elements, obviously, as we define from the query. So here, if I do that, you will see that I have a list. And the query one is returning list of leave requests. In this list, obviously, I can get the first one, the first element. And from this first element, because it's a leave request, I have what we call the persistence ID. Any object will have the persistence ID. So this persistence ID can be used as a technical ID, and this ID can be leveraged during your execution. And that can be used, for example, so here you can return the first element, and that will be the default value of your leave request business variable. And this is the main benefit, by the way, of using BDM, because everything is well integrated. You have this DAO. If you have a business data that is in external database, then it might be more complex because you need a connector for sure, and then this connector is really up to you to deal with. You will need to specify your SQL request everywhere and these kind of things. So I have an interesting question about what is the experience of the end user. Let's say you have an employee, and this employee will basically go to work and turn on his computer or her computer and log into Bonita and maybe see the portal or whatever application there and see the task and so on. Yeah, I mean, we are talking about orchestrating tasks here. So most of the time, by default, we'll have some kind of a portal. That's what we call by default, but it could be whatever kind of application that will be leveraged directly to show things to be done to someone that is logged in. That could be a list, and people are pretty flexible into taking a task based on the due date. It really depends. If you have a customer oriented with SLA, then you will have something that is more like a list, basic list with a dashboard, and people would just pick the next one, or maybe they will see the case or the tasks that are coming back to them. If you have something that is more internal, then it's more like approvals or these kind of things. Then you have more notifications, and people will maybe have some emails, and from emails you can have a URL that is redirecting to the right form for the people to approve or disapprove something. So usually it's more interactive. I mean, by default, obviously, you have this portal and people can access that. That's why we have applications. But this is also, that can be much more interactive than this because you can, make sure you have notifications and people will react to this. So most of the time you will have a lot of emails sent to inbox, and then inbox will not become the task dashboard, but it's usually how people work. So you could also have your Slack or whatever with bots and this kind of integration too. It really depends on the way your application is integrated into the overall enterprise system. It's not just Bonita. It's really what you want to build and how people work. But yeah, usually when we have application, we have some systems like Okta or this kind of dashboard, and with SSO to make sure that people are logged into Bonita in the same way they are logged in any kind of internal service. And at the same time, it's kind of seamless. It becomes seamless for the end user because they don't have to log in directly to Bonita, but they are redirected to Bonita from other applications, and they can go to Bonita in case they need. But most of our customers or end users, they don't really know it's Bonita underneath because we are talking about applications. So you can change the theme, you can change the logo, and the whole experience from the end user point of view will be not Bonita. It will be application. So it's up to you to make sure that your application fits the need you have internally, and make sure that you have the right implementation done with Bonita underneath. If I come back to the presentation here, what is remaining is what we call the deployments. So I actually shown you a little bit that, but what we deploy is a lot of different artifacts because, again, we are deploying an application, and application is dependent on a lot of things. You will have some resources like pages, as I shown you, theme or layout. You have maybe some processes, maybe not only one, that will be also dependent. So all of this has to be done. So we have some capabilities with CI, CD. We can use Jenkins to do this kind of things, for example, especially with the Enterprise Edition, by the way. But you can do that manually with the APIs. That works. You can have specific pipeline to build these applications. But what we want to highlight is you need to understand how you do it manually to be able to automate that and make it efficient. So when you deal with process deployment, you will need to make sure you can build this artifact based on the definition, and this is what we call the bar file. So this Bonita archive is basically one process that has been built. and that is stored into this bar file. So this bar file can be generated directly from the studio, and you can see it as the compiled version of the definition. So if I come back to my portal, what I can do is, as an administrator, obviously you can add a process, and here you can install. So you see this button, you can install the process. So here you can load this bar file, and on my studio I can deploy. I can select this process, server, build. Then I can select which process I want to build, and then where I want to build it and to store it, and then it will generate me the bar file. So that's something that is important, because that means that manually you can do that. But obviously, whatever you can do on this portal, you can also do that using APIs, because this portal is basically using APIs. So whatever you're doing on the portal, you can assume that you can automate that in your scripts or any kind of CI/CD you may have. So if you need to deploy processes or deploy some UI artifacts in the resources, for example, you can do that directly using REST API calls. You can also do the same thing with the live update if you need to update some configuration of the process. Let's say if you want to change the the parameter value or this kind of things, you can do that automatically too. That can be done from APIs. I just explained you how you can generate a bar file from the studio and then deploy it from into the portal. But the portal again is just part of the platform, and it will use the engine API to make sure that this deployment is done on the engine. As soon as you have deployed this bar file, what you need to do sometimes is to configure the process. And this is, you remember this panel with the parameters and the actor mappings and so on. This is where you will be able to configure the process. Sometimes you need to change this configuration, but sometimes you even do that directly here as part of the as part of the studio. So here, everything that you do here is what we call the configuration. And this configuration can be obviously built in the bar file. In case you build your bar file here, it will integrate the configuration that you have specified. But as soon as you import that, deploy that as part of as a bar file, then this configuration might be changed directly from the portal. So that might be helpful. Let's say you're working on a production environment. I guess sometimes the configuration will be slightly different because your server or your external system will be slightly different. And then you have what we call the process activation. This is something that is important to understand, so I will show you quickly. When you have a process here, what you can do is enable, disable it. So here it has been enabled because it was configured well, and automatically when you go on your studio, it enabled it because you're testing. But you can manually disable it, and you can only delete a process with all associated cases, by the way. You can delete it only if it's disabled. The difference between disable and enable is that when it's enabled, it can start a new case of it. So when it's disabled, no one will be able to start a new case, but people, if there are any in-flight cases of this specific process, then these cases will continue. We use that mostly if you have a new version of a process. Let's say you have a 2.0 that you need to roll out. What you will be doing is to install it and enable it, but you will also disable the old version to make sure that people are using the new one and not the old one. And what we call the resolved or unresolved is resolved means that the configuration is complete. If you miss something, it will be unresolved and you won't be able to enable it. So here, for example, if I, in my actors, if I have no information here, if I remove all the information about this connector, this actor mapping, you will see that this process cannot be enabled anymore because the configuration is not resolved well. So I need to make sure that this actor mapping is set up before I can enable the process. So that's the meaning of it. This one is really about the deployment of the application. I think I've shown you most of it. When you deploy the application, what you will be doing from the studio is to export the pages And when we say studio, it's basically the UI designer. And you also export the application from the studio the same way I did. And then you can import all the dependencies directly from the portal. So the pages and the process and all these dependencies directly from the portal. And then you can import the application at the end. And you could see errors when I was playing around with this. The first time it didn't work because I didn't have the page. And this is because I imported the application before importing the resources that were dependencies of the application. So that's why it was not working well at first. I have a question about the link between the BDM and the workflow. What is the scope basically of a workflow into the business data? Maybe I forgot to say that, but the business data is something that is global to not only a process, but the entire application, the entire platform. I do know that we released a new feature in 7.7 in order to make sure that you can define a specific access control on the business data. So when you have a business data, it's a single database, and what we say is that it's global to all the processes. We do not have specific business data for specific process. The reason for that is that we are working on a business. It's not specific to a process, it's specific to business. And sometimes you need to have multiple processes dealing with the same data, business data. So that's why we have that global. Usually it comes with an issue because people say, well, it's good to have everything available anywhere, but it's also difficult to make sure that we have, the right access control. And this was true until the 7.7. Here I can see from the community edition that you cannot provide this access. But from the enterprise edition, you have a second button here, and you can actually update the access, what we call the access control definition. So that's a description of who access to what in the business data. I'm thinking if I'm missing anything, but I think that's it. Well, that was a big run. Hopefully you got most of it, and that was a helpful session for you guys. Again, I'm really active in the community, so you will maybe hear from me or Antoine in the future. We used to play around with webinars, trying to play around with cutting edge technologies. So we are working on cloud and these kind of things right now. So if you're interested in some kind of integration, feel free to provide some feedback, and that will be obviously considered. So yeah, if you have further questions, again, feel free to go to Bonita community and you will get answers. Or if you are interested in the features that are coming from the Enterprise Edition and that I could not really show you here, feel free to go directly to the bonitasoft.com website, and you have a contact menu where you can provide your information, and people will basically reach out to you and answer your questions about the Enterprise Edition. This Bonita Camp is getting to an end. If you need to read more about Bonita, just check the documentation, check the website in case you are interested into the Enterprise Edition. You also have the community website link here. Again, you have the forum for the questions, you have blogs, and we do have a GitHub, you saw that. Actually, we have two of them. This one is the one from Bonitasoft, so you will see that as it is open source, we provide even the engine, all the code from the community edition. You can extend this source code without any issue. But we also have the community repository where all the contributions are stored. So just feel free to check it out. Hopefully you got a good time, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.